Appwrite is a backend-as-a-service. Think of us as the good guys to Firebase, right? We're the open source guys. We provide a lot of the same tooling in a different way. You get everything from a database, authentication, file storage, and so on. So as far as like a product-to-product comparison, I would actually say they definitely beat us because they're Google. They've been around for a long time, but there's also a lot of limitations and downsides to that. So Appwrite is another alternative. I know there's another competitor that calls themselves that. I have some hot take on that, and maybe to where they might not be really open source, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Ocel, the VP of Innovation at This.Labs, here joined by some of my favorite co-hosts. First, we have Adam Rackis, Senior Software Engineer at Spotify. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderfully. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And of course, joined by Danny Thompson. Danny is the Senior Director of Technology. Goodness sakes, Danny, I demoted you. You finding out live on the podcast. Director of Technology at This.Labs. Danny, how are you doing today?
I'm here. I'm happy to be here. I'm hanging out with a great group of people. I think it's going to be a good episode.
Yeah, that's great. Well, today we are very excited to sit down and talk with Dennis Ivey. Dennis is an online instructor and a developer advocate at Appwrite. Dennis, how are you doing today?
Doing good, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah, that's great. And so I think to get us started, maybe a little bit of introduction, because I think one of the topics that we're going to be talking about, and in fact, numerous of the topics that we're going to be talking about today, really kind of highlight the interesting journey that you've taken through tech to get to the point where you are. You've had a lot of unique experiences and maybe a career path that not a lot of other people have shared. So maybe at the beginning, you can just give us a little brief rundown of kind of the path that you've taken to get to this point in your career.
Yeah, so where I'm at right now is developer advocate at Appwrite, but it was definitely an interesting take. It was untraditional in the sense of I got into development or just being a web developer almost by accident. It was just sparked from an idea that I had, and I had to get from point A to point B. I wanted to start some kind of online business, and actually got my start building out Wix websites. Went from that to SEO and kind of progressed through that path. And this was a whole series of building some kind of business, growing it, sold one, went to the next, tried a bunch of different things, sold another business, and then kind of moved on to the education space. So several years of building and doing that whole startup life thing, indie hacking style, where I freelanced for a little bit, got my hands really dirty with it and got experience through that, but then moved on to the point where I was like, okay, I learned in an untraditional way, didn't go to college, so now I really like this idea of being able to educate others, but also use education as a way to teach myself. When I dive into a topic, it forces me to really understand it. So that was kind of my whole journey, was this weird path of figuring stuff out and learning what I needed to know for that moment in time. And that ultimately led me into being a developer advocate at one company and then jumping into Appwrite simply because I like the product. I had a really good connection with the CEO of Appwrite. Interviews went great, and I thought this is the company I want to be at for a long time. And I also like the direction that they were headed. So yeah, we can dive in anywhere we can there. But as far as Appwrite itself, I'm still primarily education focused. So my main job there is to run the YouTube channel. So I do that along with a lot of other jobs, speaking at conferences. This year I spoke at Commit Your Code, last year actually, so that was 2024 with Danny, yeah. So it's doing stuff like that where I speak at conferences, sometimes go to client meetings, take care of a lot of stuff like that. So yeah, it's wearing a lot of hats, figuring stuff out, and just having fun with life, honestly.
Well, you know, there's a lot to touch on that we kind of already said. So let's kind of start at the beginning. I know if anyone is familiar with you, I know one of my first instances of finding out who you are and at least discovering the Dennis Ivey. Like, you had sold a project for over 40 grand, right? Earlier in your career. How did that experience influence your view on monetizing your skills and maybe the monetization around projects in general? What advice would you even give to developers looking to create value beyond just the code itself?
Yeah, so just to kind of summarize that story, this was actually for a company that I worked at after freelancing. So I freelanced for a little bit and then ended up starting a web development agency. And I was working at this company, and I was taking a little break from, you know, really getting my hands dirty and building my own products, because that's only so fun, and I can talk about the downside to that. But I wanted to settle down for a little bit, and naturally, I always look for problems wherever I'm at. Like if I look for solutions, I guess, to problems. And I found this inefficiency at this lab that I was working at, and it was this massive database that they had where they would test chemicals and then put it into the system. And I ended up basically building that entire system out. I did a lot of that on my own time while doing my full-time job there, which was in marketing, also developing their website, doing SEO and so on. So that entire experience, it was the biggest product that I sold at that point, and it really taught me where to look for value in the product itself and how to find certain issues. Like a lot of people nowadays are looking for that next sexy thing that they want to build out and sell, like that AI tool, some social media application. Like they want that thing that ends up on Entrepreneur Magazine. And for me, I always looked for the boring stuff, because as much as I liked the tech and building stuff out, I always understood that the chances of succeeding in something like that are very slim. There's a lot of products out there that are very low hanging fruit that you can make a lot of money on, but don't have that buzz. So for me, it was going after that and then finding the value. It was simply just an understanding of what does this product bring to the company, and also what did I want out of it. I could have sold for a lot more than 41,000. By the way, the total sale was 62,000 and some, but I had an investor that put in some money with me that I had to pay back, so my profit was 41. But it was really a matter of leveraging where I wanted to be and say, okay, I want to break from this product and I want to move on to the next step. Whereas I could have held on to that much longer, maybe stumbled my career just to get a bigger payout, where I kind of cut losses where I needed to, but I jumped to the next step. And I'm not sure if that answers the question fully, but that explains maybe my mindset behind trying to value the product and how I can do that now in the future.
You know, what I think that's interesting about this, Dennis, and I'm curious, like, if you can introspect into your own style, is we've seen different people come into development, or just in life in general, but certainly in development in different ways, right? Some people like to go to school, go the traditional school route, get their CS degree in that piece. Other people are like going to boot camps and trying to jump in to like coding, like careers, say, you know, at the corporate level. They're trying to jump right into the stream. But you know, we don't talk a lot about the type of coming into the industry that is this product-based version, right? The people out there grinding on WordPress templates, on Wix websites, and that are really that product focused thing. To you, do you think this is like a more universal, repeatable strategy? Do you think that this is particularly because of your entrepreneurial mindset? Like when you introspect into that, how much of this is generalizable and how much of this is that there's different strokes for different folks and this happens to be yours?
I think part of it is a personality type, but the other part was I wanted to go to college. I didn't have the money though. That was the issue. So I didn't have, you know, Papa with a nice bank account that can fund everything. So it was right after high school, figure your stuff out. But the other part of me, yeah, it's the fact that there's a lot of people that have these ideas and they're just pursuing them, and tech is just a means to an end. Where there's, you know, the other side of this spectrum where, you know, people are obsessed with the tech itself, and that's the part that I'm not obsessed with. So I think I've met enough people that are okay with being in this lane right here, the WordPress side that you mentioned. I did WordPress actually after Wix. That's what I moved on to, and then ended up learning to code from that and customizing stuff. But yeah, I would say it's definitely a personality type. I think there's quite a bit of people here that really don't care to nerd out about that, and I think that's okay, and both can be successful.
How do you do it, Danny? When you're working with people like that you are mentoring, because I know you speak with a lot of people that are kind of breaking into the industry. Because like, again, I know for people, especially like people that generally produce content, they tend to be the builder types or the more entrepreneurial minded. So the feedback tends to be, hey, go out there and build something. And that is a totally natural and viable way. But like, how do you think about it, Danny? Like, do you just tell everybody to do this? Or do you tell people, hey, for you, you might want to just read a bunch of books, or you might want to write something as opposed to like build a product?
Yeah. So for me, it's like I've recently become of the mindset that in order to find success in tech, it doesn't necessarily always come with a job title, right? So for success could be around building something that's interesting that people adopt, or it could be trying to build a SaaS product, or if you listen to Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, he even says like he thinks it's now the age that is the death of SaaS, and he sees a new marketplace niche being built out around agentic AI, and a lot of the SaaS companies are probably going to migrate to that, since obviously from a marketing standpoint, it definitely makes more sense as of right now with the way people are consuming AI in general. But for me, that's kind of where I see success. Like, build something and geek out. I've never been the type where it's like, I'm just learning this thing for the sake of learning. It has zero purpose behind it. There's no motivation besides like, I just want to learn this thing. I've never been able to learn that way. So it's always been, I need to have some kind of motivation to be like, I'm going to dive deep. And sometimes for me, that's like, let me just build something completely random. And as I start going down these rabbit holes, I'll try and find or manufacture ways where I can incorporate something brand new that I've never utilized before. And that kind of just takes me down like this exciting path of like, no matter what I do right now, I'm going to kind of geek out and learn about this thing. And I'll learn all the deep down intricacies and things like that. So that building aspect has been great for me. It's been really great to kind of have a purpose in learning that thing. But when you don't have that degree background, that kind of supports your potential entry into this field. Like, at least for me, when you don't, like a bootcamp cert is not even worth the paper that is printed on, to be completely honest with you, right? So it's like, no one's going to recognize like, you graduated XYZ bootcamp? Oh man, I've been dying to get people from that place. No, that doesn't really happen. So, you might have some company where it's like, oh, we have a partnership with this company. That still doesn't guarantee your employment into that place. So the way that you kind of position yourself, but really navigate or win those conversations is by having those projects that kind of set you up for success. And so that's kind of the way that I've always advised, see it, and definitely see going on into the future as well. Because I'll even tell you at like the senior level, what is a question that you get in the interview? What are you building on the side? Like, what have you been like tinkering with? Are you contributing to a project? So having that there still helps you out in those conversations, whether you're at the junior level, senior level, or beyond.
Hey, so Dennis, I love the energy of just building things. I'm curious, any kind of tooling that you like to use? You mentioned Wix. That's a great sort of low-code, no-code website generator, I think. I've never used it, but I've heard good things, and I've heard that's about what it is. For slightly more engineering, slightly deeper engineering problems, is there any kind of tooling that you like?
Yeah, so HTMX, since we're planning to discuss this one, this is something that caught my attention, first of all, from their marketing. I thought it was a meme at first. I didn't, it's just one of those things you see on your feed and you don't really pay mind into it or pay any attention to it.
Dude, everyone's the CEO of HTMX. I still don't understand that, by the way.
They have like 900, I think, by this point.
I don't understand it.
Yeah, so once I looked into it, like I worked with Alpine JS for a little bit, like just tried it, didn't really dive into it. But the first time I tried HTMX, like that's kind of what I do on the weekends. I get bored and I have to occupy my mind with something. I can't just not do anything. And there was a weekend where I just said, okay, let's just go all in and test it out. And I gave it a try, and my mind was blown because I had this situation way back in my career, like 7 years prior to this moment, where I built out a website or an entire piece of software basically on Django with Python. And my issue was the fact that I didn't have any front-end framework that I was working with, and I had to write a bunch of clunky JavaScript code to make the website dynamic. And this was actually the topic of my title at Commit Your Code, where I basically said this was my issue. I had to make a dynamic UI, and my only solution was to write really bad, insecure JavaScript code to make anything happen. And I had to switch my entire front-end to React, which is great, but HTMX solves so many of those issues. So I kind of became obsessed with it. I'm thinking, okay, this is the rebirth of template engines. I love Django's built-in templating engine. I know EJS is one with Express that works very well. There's Jinja. I always like that style because that's how I built my first application. And HTMX really makes template engines worth it now beyond just a not statically rendered, but a server rendered application. It really opens the door for a lot. And I think we're going to see a lot change because of either HTMX or tools similar to it. And my hope is that this creates that innovation and someone really just perfects it and makes it more mainstream.
Can you give us a little more, like for some of our listeners, what makes HTMX different? And feel free to use the word hypermedia at some point in your answer.
You know what's funny is I hate using the word hypermedia because no one understands what that actually means. There's like so many different variations of it, but HTMX in a nutshell, think of it this way. It's a JavaScript package designed to write less JavaScript. So what you're doing is you're basically extending HTML. So in HTML, typically when you're sending or getting data, you can only send a post or a GET request. Now, in order to see data updated in your UI, you need to re-render your application. HTMX essentially adds these custom attributes into your HTML that lets you send beyond just a GET and a POST request, but it also lets you update your UI within those HTML tags. So you can specify a URL, you can specify what happens in the response, without writing a bunch of JavaScript. Under the hood, it's all JavaScript still, but it means you don't have to write it, so you can get away with having to commit to it, or someone that maybe isn't that comfortable with JavaScript, they can make their application more dynamic without having to understand all of that.
But how does this translate? Like, so going back one point and including this, like you mentioned, like Jinja. I used Jinja when I was using Python as well, and like that was great for like SQL templates or like network configuration templates, something like that, right? Where do you see that at like the enterprise level? And so like even the example that you just gave now is like, oh, this is great for someone who's not comfortable with X. Is this more of like a bridge to that next level as opposed to like utilization in an enterprise or larger organization kind of solution? Because I just don't see it.
So that's the part I don't like using that terminology, because I often say it's to write less JavaScript, but it doesn't mean you get away with JavaScript. Like it's not the alternative to that, because if you're a serious developer in web dev, like, you should know JavaScript, especially if you're doing anything in the front end. But it's just another way to do something. And as far as large scale applications, unless you're creating insanely dynamic UIs, I mean, I can think of a lot of scenarios where it's useful. I have to probably go into specifics, but I would probably more so have to imagine what I couldn't do with it. Like, unless I'm doing something like building out a Figma, like where your UI has to update and I have to see other users via WebSockets and so on, don't use HTMX for that. But any other UI, like even a social media application, I don't know its scalability, but you can have Twitter built out with a feed that constantly gives you real-time data. It updates your feed, so anytime a new post is made, you can like a post, interact with it. Your entire UI would work within HTMX. Like that's a pretty big, large-scale application that you'd be able to make work. So I don't know its limitations. Carson himself, the creator of HTMX, writes about this in his on the HTMX website. He says it hasn't been tested, but we don't really see any reasons to why it wouldn't scale. Like it's more of a, you can do this, not you should do this over one or the other. Like there's some scenarios where it's not going to work, but I don't think it's ruled out too much yet.
Well, we have more of our episode to come, but first we'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs. This episode is proudly sponsored by This.Labs, your partner in modern web development and consulting. Here at This.Labs, we specialize in empowering businesses to reach their full potential through technology. We understand that in today's fast-paced tech environment, adaptability and efficiency are crucial, and that's why we offer tailored solutions designed to meet your unique challenges and objectives, and our commitment to excellence and client success is what sets us apart as a trusted advisor in the industry. Discover how This.Labs can transform your business. Visit this.co to learn more about our services and how we can help you stay ahead in this competitive landscape. Thanks to This.Labs for sponsoring this episode, and for my team for their dedication to advancing the developer community. All right, back to our show.
So Theo, that most people have seen on Twitter, he has an interesting take on HTMX. He's been pretty positive about it. He says that HTMX is more for back-end developers who want to build a website, who don't know a lot of front-end tech. So some of the details I got left out, like a lot of your back-end endpoints, instead of just sending down like a JSON payload, you actually send down HTML. And then HTMX takes the HTML from the back-end service request and it rams it into the DOM. And so that's good and bad, and that'll simplify things. But now all of your service endpoints are sending down HTML. And so it's going to change how you build things by a lot. Is that kind of how you see it? Like it's a good tool for back-end devs who don't want to learn a lot of front-end stack, but just want to build something effectively?
Yeah, I think I would say that. So you're right in the sense of it's going to change your architecture, where typically you're going to have a bunch of API endpoints and you're working within that. I feel like if you're comfortable with that, I don't see enough reason to go into HTMX unless you specifically just want to stick with some kind of template engine. But yeah, like that approach of rendering out HTML, like it's something that would probably be better for back-end developers or anybody that's just not that comfortable with web dev in general. Like the idea is pretty simple. You return an HTML response and you just set identifiers to what part of the UI that's going to update, and that's it. And that's quite easy to understand. So yeah, at this point, I think that is more of where the market is targeting, or what market they're targeting, but it doesn't mean that that's where it's going to stick, because I don't like the idea that it's just going to be branded as, for beginners, back-end devs, and small projects. I think it can go much further than that.
It's interesting because, there's this whole new industry of tools that are like popping up, right? Like we have tools that are like a backend as a service. And then we have other tools like, for example, what you're describing, at least what I'm imagining, since I haven't utilized, I haven't really dug in deep. I see the sea of HTMX thing all over Twitter, but I didn't really go further than that. Like you, I also thought it was a meme for a while. But like based on what you're saying, it reminds me of Vaadin for Java, where for Java developers, it's basically like a tool. And we had a guest on here, and I'm sure you know this guest as well, Lawrence Lockhart, where he was kind of talking about it, and I got to mess with it. I do Java work, so I kind of trickle with that a little bit, but it basically gives you the tooling to make Java code front end available, essentially. So like if you're a Java dev working at a company, but you don't necessarily know how to make a front end of a website, you can literally use Vaadin with zero CSS, and it will kind of make that front end aspect for you in Java code, which is pretty cool. But like this is starting to give me those vibes where it's like you're a back end dev that doesn't necessarily know the front end. This is a great way to kind of build something up if you want to have all your logic, but you don't necessarily know how to display it on a front end in a meaningful way for somebody to utilize. And I'm guessing that's kind of where this like lies in with I don't want to say the full use case, but a very strong one.
Yeah, I'm looking at Vaadin. The idea sounds similar. I'm gonna have to look into it, but think of it this way. Let's take a step back and imagine template engines. Like, are they still relevant today? Would you say yes or no?
For sure, there's definitely use cases.
Okay, so the template engine is relevant only to a certain extent. Like they can only do so much. So just imagine it in the sense of we're extending a template engine as opposed to trying to flip things around and go to template engines and HTMX versus, React and Next.js. We're just extending the capabilities of template engines. Not we, HTMXs. And I think if you look at it that way, then you can see where it can push. But I think that's a good baseline, because the problem with template engines is we expect so much dynamic functionality in websites. And the second you get to that point, like, let's be honest, if you're using a template engine, you're probably not that good with JavaScript, and you're going to end up writing really bad JavaScript. Like for me, I found so many security flaws in my own code simply in how I'm sending CSRF tokens back and forth. That was an issue. So we're simply pushing those limits, and I think we expanded the capacity quite a bit there. And that was, again, the premise of that talk was I built out this application, I reached the limits of a template engine, and now I have to go to React because I can't do any more. And then I grab HTMX, which I found years later. I was like, holy shit, like this could have easily solved that problem. Now, looking back at it, it's probably good that I went to React just because I believe it advanced my career that much further. But a lot of people aren't trying to they're just trying to get their product complete. They're not necessarily looking to, learn things to advance their career. They just need to get something done, kind of like where I was at that point. So I think that's the better baseline.
It's funny though, because it does join a set of technologies that came out around the same time, which was kind of like technologies that nobody asked for, right? Like I think that's fed some of the meme, right? Like HTMX comes out and it was like, who was asking for this? But I think it's the explosive growth of it that I think exposes that there is a set of developers out there that are underserved by the sort of class of tooling and the thrust of tooling and where it's going. Again, we're talking about people, a large group of people that are coming into our industry by hacking WordPress, templates and, building Wix sites and things like that. People need these kind of tools. They don't necessarily need a full Next.js website. The other one that comes up like this, I don't know if you guys have used it, but the one that came out of nowhere to me was like TRPC. That was another one of these technologies that just seemingly like, who was wondering about this? But then it exploded in growth, kind of moderated a little bit. And again, it just kind of finds purchase with people for whom that is their mental model. And I kind of like that about things like HTMX is like, listen, when I look at it, I see a lot of echoes of AngularJS in it, the first version of Angular. It feels very natural, feels very like sort of familiar to me. And I can see that there is just going to be a set of developers and a set of tools that's great to have, especially with something like HTMX, where they're kind of promising that they're going to have no features as a feature, the idea that it's going to be extremely stable, that this is just going to be a tool you can always reach for, again, whatever you need it for at any point, and it's going to kind of be what it is. I don't know, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, extremely unopinionated too. But the funny thing is, I would say all of us here are relatively on the older end of developers, right? Like we're all 30 plus. The funny thing is, the biggest pushback I see against HTMX is from the youngins, the kids that are just getting into it.
Interesting.
And I've talked to developers where they don't understand that an SPA, a single page application, is actually a single page application. They don't understand this concept of SSR. They think this is something completely new, even though that word is new because we didn't have to use a term server rendered because everything was server rendered. So it's a lot of developers that have been around that they have seen the difference and they see the bloat that kind of comes on with what we're doing with these client-side frameworks. And they're saying, wait a minute, we can keep developing the way we used to, but still meet modern expectations. Whereas the young developers, they're so used to just shipping these massive JSON blobs. Building an API is just part of the process. It's like, this is just what we do. And then I give them HTMX and I say, now you're rendering out some HTML blobs, and they're shocked because they've never seen anything like that, when that's what we did in the beginning. We would ship a massive HTML blob as in the form of a page, and that was the only thing returned back to the client side. And it's really funny to see that because I've noticed it in an age thing. Now I don't want to kill HTMX's marketing and brand it as a, us old folks working on it.
Shakes fist at cloud. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't want it to be branded that way, but it's funny for who's been accepting it. It's been, people that have been around for a little bit, but we got the wisdom.
This butts up against the talk I'm giving in Miami next month. I hope I can see you there. But yeah,
React Miami?
React Miami, yeah.
I'll be there.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of went all in on the SPAs without understanding why. SPAs are great, but if you don't need a whole ton of dynamicism, if it's not very dynamic, you can just keep using the old tooling. That's totally fine. And maybe HTMX can squeeze out a few more drops of what you need from a template engine. So this is all great and fine.
It's going well with Laravel too, PHP. I mean, it's making a comeback for that reason. I think people just got so fed up with over-engineering that we're finding other alternatives. I love it.
My take on this is it never went anywhere. It was just social media being social media, because I knew way too many successful PHP developers that were more than happy with people avoiding it. So if a meme kept you away from money, you learned something there. I guess taking this into like a slightly different direction than, since we were talking about Vaadin and we're talking about like, backend as a service, or maybe using backend as a way to display something on the front end, it kind of is a natural progression to talking about Appwrite. I'm a big fan of Appwrite. I've been using Appwrite for almost 2 years on like side things. Matter of fact, I'm literally building an entire event platform right now, and Appwrite is my database and auth for everything. So I kind of am a fan of the organization. I think you might seem to like it a little bit. Like, you want to give us an breakdown explanation of like what Appwrite is, and if people aren't familiar with it, maybe perhaps why they should check it out.
Yeah, so Appwrite is a backend as a service, as Danny mentioned. Think of us as the good guys to Firebase, right? We're the open source guys. We provide a lot of the same tooling in a different way, and you get everything from a database, authentication, file storage, and so on. So as far as like a product to product comparison, I would actually say they definitely beat us because they're Google. They've been around for a long time, but there's also a lot of limitations and downsides to that. So Appwrite is another alternative. I know there's another competitor that calls themselves that. I have some hot takes on that, and maybe to where they might not be really open source, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at. We go with that model, and really, I really enjoy the product myself. Like, when I was looking at it, I'm more of a backend developer, and I think that's kind of what got me excited about it, because even as a backend developer, I still looked to tools like Firebase. Like, hey, I want to get this proof of concept up and going, but then I have to build out my entire backend, which for the most part I don't mind. But when it comes to authentication, security, that stuff can be a real pain. So that's when I saw an opportunity to work there. I was like, this is a product that I actually truly can endorse. I love the fact that I can work with a lot of front-end tools, see how it integrates, and just ran with it. But yeah, I'll leave it there at this point. We can kind of see which direction we want to go with.
It is funny how much this conversation will kind of go a little bit the way of the HTMX conversation, which is to say that, there are certainly products that are providing a different set of easy features. We've made reference to Next.js a few different times here and what Vercel might offer through that platform. But when I build a side project, the fastest I can get to something that is immediately deployable is with a service like Appwrite, because the things that you need most often in apps are the things that it provides right out of the box, like not the least of which is the real-time updates. I mean, the amount of really cool interfaces you can build for apps just off of the basis of having easy real-time eventing and live updating is innumerous. And that is code that can be obnoxious to write for yourself. So what I like about that is just, again, it's like, maybe it's not everything that a hosting platform could possibly be and every feature that could possibly be built, but it's all of the core features that I've ever needed in a side project, which is,
Yeah, it's funny because when you ask Eldad, the CEO of Appwrite, why he created it, he said, I got tired of doing the same thing over and over again. That was like his short answer. He was always hacking something together, and he got sick and tired of having to spend, hours, if not days in many cases, building out that core infrastructure. Now, we could go with some kind of template or something like that where you have like a starter pack ready to go, but why not spin up an instance, have it hosted immediately, and then get going with it? Now, I'm not going to say it's the solution for everything, but in that case, yeah, absolutely, it works.
Yep. Auth and eventing instantaneously. That's it. The two most obnoxious things to set up on any side project, if you got ADHD like me, is another auth setup and another WebSocket setup.
You don't like configuring your own WebSockets?
So, very serious question. Whenever it comes to stuff like this, I like to play like devil's advocate. It doesn't matter whether I like it or not, and I'd be very serious about this. So it's like, some might argue that Appwrite, maybe it's promising, right? But there's several competitors out there. Some definitely have marketing where they become very synonymous with certain projects and things like that. But it could also be lacking certain advanced features or integrations that are found probably in like more mature backend-as-a-service providers. What are the key features that you're still working on, or what are things that you're saying like, this actually is a very strong offering from Appwrite compared to a competitor that people need to pay attention to that could probably ease some of this conversation?
So I'll mention the competitor name, but there's, Supabase is another one. Appwrite, as a developer advocate, by the way, I'm also one of the biggest critics of our own features. And right now, my biggest criticism is with our database. Like, we have a relational database, which I was a big advocate for changing it because we call it documents and collections, but it's all tables. And that was simply just because of our API, which I don't like that. I want to make sure we call those tables and rows. It's a relational database. That's it. So our database is a little bit underdeveloped in the sense of creating relationships between certain tables is a little bit challenging. So that's something we're going to fix soon, but I think that's our biggest, that's our Achilles heel is that. And then with auth, I do want to switch to a JWT model. We use sessions, but I do want to provide an alternative to really become more of a competitor to something like Clerk. From there, the funny thing is, like when you look at Supabase, Supabase, as they say, is just Postgres. They're a wraparound Postgres. That's their biggest advantage. And because of that, in the PG vector database, they really thrive in the AI community. I would say I would not compete toe-to-toe with them. They have us there at this point until we make some of our fixes, which are coming really soon. The funny thing is, though, if I were to make a comparison here, there's actually an article that came out, and I'm going to make a video on this on the Appwrite YouTube channel. There's an article that compared Supabase and Appwrite, and what they did is they compared a self-hosted instance and they compared a cloud version all within the free tier, and they did a bunch of performance tests. Appwrite more than 3x and 2x Supabase on a load test and a breakpoint test, and it was overwhelmingly, and it really blew my mind because I didn't realize how bloated their product was at its core. And there's I have a theory behind why that is. Now, again, we're gonna, this is recorded, so I don't know how much I want to say here, but the thesis is when Appwrite was created, Eldad said we're going to build everything from scratch. We're going to understand our core product, every feature that we add. We're going to hand code it unless we really have to rely on a third-party package. Because of that, we developed slower. So Supabase is already in GA. We're only adding new regions within the next month here. They got to market faster, and they took this big market share. With Appwrite, it took us longer to develop, but because of that, we're very lightweight, and we don't have any extra bloat. Where Supabase, they got to market so fast because they use a lot of external packages. So their entire thing is basically a wrapper around a bunch of third-party packages, and it's a lot slower because they have stuff that they don't need in there, and they're relying on these open source packages, and that really slows them down. That's kind of my theory behind that. But that's like, I guess, a plus and a minus to where we're at in this situation.
There's another topic about Appwrite that I really wanted to ask you about, especially being kind of in the DevRel sort of side of things. And that is that one of the things I've said a lot about developer relations and just marketing in the tech space, in the development space, is that I see it as being a couple years behind the equivalent things in the gaming space. I see a lot of parallels in this. Like Twitch adoption was a couple years behind. And one of the things that I've sort of talked about with the tech space is that there was a period in tech where companies were just buying sort of popular people on Twitter and bringing them in to be internal developer relations. And, that sort of is, again, years behind the gaming space, which sort of learned the value of sort of external sort of, influencer marketing. And one of the things that I've really appreciated or just noticed about Appwrite is that when I go to conferences or I'm like talking to people, the amount of people kind of in that community talking about it just gives you that sense. You're like, this thing is a huge deal. Like, I haven't heard about him. What's going on with this? So I was kind of curious if you could talk about the intention behind the strategy there, because it just really does feel as a company, you guys are doing something that not a lot of companies are doing in the space and seem to be doing quite well, actually, as far as outreach and really getting people to talk about you.
Yeah, so the fact that you're feeling the presence is definitely a compliment. Like, that's a big form of marketing and developer advocacy. Like, our approach here is to just be all over the community. Like, we want to see what the community's doing and not so much push marketing on the community, but rather pull in a sense of we're involved with what you're doing. And that's been the approach on the YouTube channel. Any events that we go to, we just like to make an appearance, see what people are talking about, and try to see where we fit in. Because at the end of the day, we're not supposed to be the story. We're just a tool to get you to where you're going. So that's why we've been sponsoring hackathons on the YouTube channel. It's like the questions I'm answering there are questions that you would have on your own, regardless of the product that you're working on. So you're dealing with, how do I sign in with Google? How do I add this into my application? I look at that and say, okay, we have that as a service. Here's how you can do it. But I also want to talk about the core idea and how OAuth 2 works. So we figure the more we give to the community, the more we just get in front of that, the community will decide if they want to use us or not, and if we're the best option for them. So our job is just to get in front of that and find all the tools you're using and see where we can help. And I think that's what's been so effective, like why so many people are responding to it, because whether you're using us or not, you know about us because we're involved in all those areas.
Yeah, listen, part of the reason the topics we were talking about, HTMX, TRPC, part of the reason they popped off was because of people like Theo, people like Primeagen and things like that, who are using these tools live, talking about them every day, showing people, not just, again, through ad reads, but through actual usage, what works. And again, I just think that that is such a powerful way, this idea that people crave that authenticity. They really want to see the tool being used and not just hear about the tool being used. And I love that about what you guys are doing as far as just, letting people decide by just using it as they would use it and just get people kind of inspired to give it a try themselves. Well, pretty soon here we are arriving at the end of our conversation, but as we wrap up, can you maybe let people know where they can find you online in case they want to ask you any questions or, follow what you've got going on?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Twitter and the official Appwrite YouTube channel. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure those will all be added somewhere in a video description, but feel free to reach out and connect.
Wonderful. Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this Modern Web podcast. Thanks, of course, to our guest, Dennis. As we say, the conversation does not stop here. You can find Dennis on Twitter at DennisIV11. You can find me online at Rob Ocel. As for Danny, you can find him online at DThompsonDev, and you can find Adam at Adam Rackis. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. And as we wrap up, we would just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping businesses like yours fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. All right, see y'all next time.